Hey everyone, Jill Castle here, and you're on the Nourished Child Facebook page, not the podcast, but the Facebook page. And I am here today talking about the Halloween hangover. And I can tell you, I have a Halloween hangover, not because my kids trick-or-treated and got a whole bunch of food, but having all this candy left over and having bought it for all the Halloweeners that were going to come to my house and who didn't. I did not have a whole lot of Halloween guests at my house last night, so I have all of this candy left over. And hey, Clancy, if you know anything about me, you know that I love candy, and it is probably one of my weak spots in conjunction with coffee. Candy and coffee are two of my weak nutrition spots. So I am a big lover of sour, chewy candy, and these little guys, they are my bad boys. So I'm sure many of you as parents of children who went out last night trick-or-treating, enjoyed your evening. I sure hope you enjoyed your evening. But you might have some questions and maybe even some worries about how to deal and how to handle this whole bunch of Halloween candy loot. So I thought today I would share some tips and some strategies with you, and really, from a professional standpoint, but also from the fact that I've raised 4 kids and we've dealt with it. I've dealt with Halloween for 21 years. So there's been a lot of Halloween dealing over the years. The other thing I will say is that I know that there is a lot of talk about Halloween and how to handle it right now. And there are a lot of opinions and a lot of strategies out there. And one thing I can tell you for sure is that just because one strategy works for one family doesn't mean it's going to work for another family. So what I want to do today is give you some tips and strategies to think about and really ponder on what would make the most sense for your family. Ideally, the goal is to enjoy candy on Halloween, enjoy that holiday. But I also recognize that, big bowlfuls of candy that are hanging around day after day after day can make some parents pretty nervous. So as you saw, I have a huge bowl of candy. It's been sitting on my kitchen counter since yesterday morning, and it will probably sit on my kitchen counter for at least another week. We'll see what happens to it. I'm not too restrictive about candy, and my kids are teenagers now, so I am actually much looser about it than I probably was when they were younger. So, but what I want you to think about is I want to pose a couple of questions here for you. What if you could fully enjoy Halloween and not worry about what or how much your child ate? What if I told you your worry might be making things worse or even harder for you and your child? And what if I told you that all you really need is a system and a strategy, and that can help you manage sort of the Halloween candy that's sitting on your counter right now, and it can also help you develop an exit strategy that's easy on everyone. So, yes, it's the day after Halloween. I'm sure you have perused through all the candy that was snagged over the course of the evening last night. One of the things that we used to do as a family of 4. Hey, Clancy. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I love this too. Thanks for being on here. One of the things that we used to do is, obviously, I would take, with my husband, all of the 4 kids out to trick-or-treat. And you can imagine we had pounds and pounds and pounds of candy. We also had one child in the family that was allergic to tree nuts. So one of the first things that we would do is we would all come back and we would dump all the candy in the center, and each child would have their little, we'd have it in the center, but we'd have it kind of cordoned off, so each child had their little section, and they would go through and sort candy. So for our child that had food allergies, we immediately got rid of all the candies that would have tree nuts. So that was sort of our first pass. Then the kids would separate out their candy into their favorites and to a pile that they wanted to trade. So then they would go through this whole process of trading with each other, and then repile their loot back into their bags. And I did not police the bags initially. Like that night, they had as much candy as they wanted to eat on Halloween night. They would eat a lot too. And we had years where some kids would not feel so great at the end of the night because they ate too much candy. Now, mind you, one of the strategies for going out on Halloween is to offer a full meal before you head out the door. And I did used to do that. We would eat before we went out Halloweening. But what I want to focus on is what you do with this loot that you have. So after you've sorted it, you've parsed it out, you've decided which candies need to go, need to be tossed, or need to be eliminated, maybe because of a food allergy, or maybe because you have a child who has learning or behavioral challenges like ADHD, and you're not having any of the food additives or the dyes around. You might be eliminating some of that. But once you've gone through all of that and you figure out what you're going to keep, then, and you've gotten through the evening and your children have had their fill, you've got the next day. You've got today, November 1st, the day after Halloween. What are you going to do? So what I used to do is I kept the candy. I allowed my children to have access to the candy. They used to take it up to their rooms. When they got older, though, we kept it down in the kitchen in the pantry. So everybody had their own bags, but we kept them in the pantry. And we had access to those. I would pack candy in their lunch. They could pick out a couple of pieces and put in their lunchbox. They could pick out a couple of pieces and have it after school with their snack. So if they were having a bowl of cereal after school, which was a lot of times what we would have for a snack, they could have a couple of pieces of candy, of their Halloween candy, with that. Now, I know that some people might want to keep all the candy in a central area and pile it all together. That's perfectly fine. A lot of children are happy to share and compile their candy into one central location. My 4 kids, they wanted ownership of their own candy. They wanted their favorite stuff. So that's how we operated. I kept the candy out and about and accessible and part of our, really part of our daily eating for a good solid week, where they would see it in their lunchbox. They could have it after school. I didn't limit it. I didn't restrict it. I didn't tightly control it, because I believe, and I have the philosophy, that when we get too invested in controlling our children's eating or restricting their access to food, that can actually backfire and make them want that food more, and even seek it out, even sneaking perhaps when we're not looking. And I really didn't want that for my children. I don't really want that for other children either. So whether you allow your children to have free access for that first week, or even maybe 10 days, or however long it takes for them to really feel like they had full enjoyment of the holiday and the candy, to me is okay, as long as you're continuing to balance healthy meals, balance healthy snacks in the context of that whole diet. So you can have the candy, but you also still want to have those nutritious, nourishing meals on a regular schedule throughout the day. So I want to say a little thing about restriction, because I'm watching the media, I'm watching a lot of articles as we will start to see roll out a lot of articles about the holidays. We're seeing stuff about Halloween as well, and how to handle the sweets and how to handle the extra sugar in children's diets. And I'm seeing a lot of articles about making sure you're not restricting. So I do want to say a little something about that, because what can be very confusing for parents is this idea of, am I restricting? I don't want to restrict, but if I have any source of control, is that restriction? And I think it really boils down to, what's your intention for keeping such tight control over candy, for example. So if you have your Halloween candy and you're not letting your children really have full enjoyment of it, whether it be that you're parsing it out during the week or that you just pull the whole bowl out after school and let them have a period of time where they can just have as much as they want, if you're not incorporating some of those abilities for your children to really enjoy the candy that they get, what does that mean for your child in terms of their feeling of whether they're feeling like they've been restricted or too controlled? And I have a history with this myself, and I wrote about this for US News and World Report and on my blog, but I grew up feeling restricted around candy and sweets, not because my mother was trying to tightly control those foods in my diet. It was really because we didn't have the money to buy a lot of that superfluous food, which my parents are very practical, and they felt like, well, that's not part of what your body needs to grow, so we're not going to spend a lot of money on those types of foods. But when they did show up, man, I was like so radar focused on those foods, and hence why I still like this kind of stuff. Having it around for me is a challenge. And if I realistically step back and look at Halloween last night and having all this candy and having my kids around all this candy, I ate more of it than they did. They could take it or leave it. I'm the one that's sort of triggered by this stuff. And I believe that goes back to the way I was raised and my own perception that I had in terms of the accessibility I was able to gain around sweets. So I say that because what we know about the research in children, and this can be variable based on the personality of the child, their temperament, their makeup. Some kids will truly not care at all about whether you're controlling sweets or not in the house. Other children can be very triggered and can be sensitive to that, looking for those foods that you're tightly controlling, and when they get access to them, really digging in, almost to a point of not being able to control themselves. So again, I share these tips understanding full and well, after many years of working with families, that you really have to know your child and his tendencies or her tendencies to come up with the best plan. Because if your child feels restricted or is perceiving sort of your strategy around sweets and sugar as restrictive or too controlling, then that child might not respond in the way that you want them to respond when you're putting the controls on these foods. So with that being said, understanding your child and understanding that, can I have a big bowl of candy sitting out on the counter, or will my child not be able to stop and eat the entire bowl and get themselves sick? Or do I have kids that will, like mine, yeah, it's there, they'll partake, but they'll also walk away from it without being triggered by it. So understanding where your child is related to that will really help you get a handle on the best strategy for them. So that little segue into restriction. One of the things that, and I'm just looking down because I want to make sure I cover these little points that I had outlined for you guys. One of the things is wherever you decide to store your candy and however you decide to manage it, be it it's in the pantry and you're pulling it out at snack time, I always think it's a good idea to have a policy about children asking first. So ask for candy and convey that to your child. You can say, I understand we have all this candy. We just had Halloween. It's wonderful. It's great. But we need to be respectful, and I want to make sure that This gets included in your day-to-day, but I want you to ask first. I don't want you to just run into the pantry and take what you want when you want it. I want you to ask first. So that's one little tip. It works great with a lot of kids. Kids are genuinely, in the most scenarios, willing to please their parents. And if you ask them and explain to them that you want them to ask, then they can abide by that. We talked about sorting and prioritizing the candy. I think that's important because I think it's important that the underlying message there is conveyed to children that, like, let's spend our enjoyment on things we truly enjoy. There are things in this bucket that, well, not too many things actually. There are things in this bucket that I don't enjoy, so I don't eat them. And I think that's an important lesson that we can teach to our children too, that truly focus in on the things that you enjoy eating, the candy that really speaks to you. If you're a chocoholic and you love chocolate, then of course chocolate is going to be something that your child will want to keep in their Halloween bag. But if they don't care at all about sour, chewy candy, then trade it out or get rid of it. Let's just hone in on the stuff we really, really like. Clancy, I just want to respond to you. It's important for our family to teach our kids to eat the candy that they enjoy, not because it's in their bag. Exactly, that's exactly what I was saying. And restricting candy gives the treat power, not the child. Absolutely. I agree. I prefer to give the power to my kids. Yes, that's a great point, and very much what I was trying to highlight. Like, you want your child to learn how to be in charge of the candy, not the candy in charge of your child, which sometimes, honestly, I feel like the candy is in charge of me, because when it's around, I'm like, ooh, I really like that, and it's hard for me to stop. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I think that goes back to sort of my upbringing and my makeup too. So, sorting and prioritizing those candies that your children really enjoy eating and want to partake in. The other thing is, what's your exit strategy? So a lot of times families would be like, okay, I've got all this, but I feel like it's going to be around forever and ever, and how do I get rid of it without feeling like I'm being restrictive or controlling? I really think that kids over time can lose interest in candy. So like I said, I keep this out on the counter. I want my kids to be like, hey, yeah, you know, we just had Halloween. This is all our candy. Isn't it great? I incorporate it into their lunches. Today I sent 2 pieces of candy in both of my kids' lunch boxes for lunch. After school, if they want to have candy, I'm cool with it. If they want to have it for dessert after dinner, I'm cool with it. Because I really feel like my job is to hit a home run with all the meals and the snacks and find a way to get this candy incorporated into their day in a healthy manner. But what about, you know, we're a week out from Halloween, or we're 2 weeks out from Halloween. Do we still have the candy bucket on the counter? I say start to move it, start to inch it out so it's not so in your face. So what I'll do is, after a week, I might take this candy and just tell the kids, I'm moving the candy to the freezer so it stays fresh. So the kids know where it is. And remember, I have the ask first rule, so they have to ask if they do want to go to the freezer and get candy. But I do move it out of sight. So I might put it in the pantry. Oftentimes I put it in the freezer. So I move it out of sight. And you know what? That has always worked for me. They might ask the first day that they know it's not on the counter, that it's in the freezer. Could they have some more? Yes, of course. Let's pull some out, pull a few pieces out for your snack. But when it's out of sight, over time it becomes out of mind. So to me, it's a natural segue to exit the whole candy scene around Halloween. So some of the other ways that people will manage their exit strategy around Halloween is to do a switch, where they do a switch or a swap of all the candy that was gotten on Halloween for money, or for a game, or for a new book, or something non-food related. Another way that parents manage it is to use a buyback program. So the dentists oftentimes will, I think the American Dental Association will have a buyback program where the dentist will purchase the candy from the child or from the family. Other organizations, military organizations, will take donations of candy. I always send some of the candy to my husband's work. A lot of times will say, take some of this and move it on. So there are lots of ways that you can manage your exit strategy around Halloween candy. The point is to have a strategy, because when you don't have a strategy and you're faced with the day in, day out requests for candy, it can get frustrating for parents, and you can start to feel like things are getting out of control, and they don't have to. So if you think this through, you can have a way to exit from the candy, and a way to introduce it and include it for your children in reasonable ways, and then, you know, have a plan for moving away from the candy and getting on with life. You know, if your life doesn't have, you know, huge amounts of candy in it on a day-to-day basis, then you're eventually wanting to get back to that. So I think one of the other important things is to communicate a lot around the influx of candy in your home, the holiday, and because this actually, the beauty of Halloween and all this candy allows kids to learn quite a bit about how to manage it. And it offers opportunities to have productive conversations about eating and about food balance. And you don't have to necessarily talk about good food, healthy eating, unhealthy eating. You just talk about eating, and that our bodies need a balance of different food groups and different nutrients. And by allowing conversations about that, particularly around the holidays when the food balance can easily get off, it's a natural way to teach children how to incorporate all kinds of foods into their diet in a balanced way. So that's about all I have to say to you today. I've been on here for a while, but remember, I really want children to be able to fully enjoy Halloween. And Halloween is about dressing up and getting a lot of candy. So we want them to enjoy all of that. Clancy's asking, can you give an example on how to say no with your ask first rule? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So if you have an ask first rule and your child asks, but you're feeling like, gosh, she's already had quite a bit of sweets today, or a lot of candy, or we've been eating a lot of sweets, and I just am feeling like we need to take a break, you can say to your child, you know what, I'm really feeling like we need to take a little break. Let's have something more nutritious. Or you can say, you know, it sounds like you're hungry. Let's see if we can find something that will satisfy your craving. Are you craving sweet? Are you craving sour? Let's find an alternative. We've had a lot of candy today, so we'll have more candy tomorrow. So there's always, you know, when you say no, you want to always create or predict into the future when you can say yes. That can reassure a child. I hope that helps. But yeah, asking first. Sometimes you are going to say no, and I'm a huge advocate of saying no nicely. I actually wrote a blog post on my blog called How to Say No Nicely to Food, and it really does go through several scenarios and ways in which you can say no that are not restrictive, not oppressive, and that can satisfy the child's question and help the child understand when they can see those sweets or those desirable foods in the future. So one of the other things I was hoping to convey to you is that if you worry too much about sweets and you worry too much about your child's eating, and I don't want to say that in a manner that puts you off because we all worry. Even I worry as a mom. I worry too. It's a very natural thing. But remember, if you get too caught up in too much worry and too much concern over your child's eating, that can seep through into your interaction with your child. So just what will quell the worry and the concern is to have a strategy and a plan. And what that strategy and plan will look like will be very much dependent on your family values, the child, the personality of your child you have in your family. And it's not necessarily going to look like the same strategy that I use or your friend uses. You need to really hone in on what strategy will work for your family and your child. So a few resources I have for you. You can definitely check out my blog. I have blog posts on the sugar content of candy, because there are some people who are concerned about the sugar content of candy. I have blog posts on the food allergens in Halloween candy, because we do have trick-or-treaters out there who have food allergies and they like to know which candies are a little bit safer for their children to eat. I have food dyes in Halloween candy, a post on that for those children who are avoiding food dyes. I have just general healthy tips on how to balance Halloween candy. And the other thing I would point you to, I wrote an article 2 years ago for CNN on my philosophy around Halloween candy. I think you'll see a lot of what you heard here today, but compiled in a nice tight blog post. The other thing is you can go ahead and read about restriction. I have a pretty in-depth post on my blog post about restriction. You want to know more of the scientific background. Hi, Heather. Heather says, what is your view on children receiving treats in the classroom? So that's a pretty controversial topic, and I'm assuming you're coming at it from holiday treats or party treats, that sort of thing. I think treats in the classroom are getting tougher and tougher for families to feel good about and for families to manage. I'm okay with occasional treats in the classroom, but I want to know what's going on as a parent, and I want that open dialogue with my children to understand, what their whole day looks like. So I am of the mindset that, and I encourage my clients to do this too, is to have conversations lighthearted, not the inquisition, what did you eat at school today, but just an understanding of the foods that your child is eating throughout the day and what they're getting exposed to. Not to be, the purpose to know this information is not to be restrictive, but it is to be able to maybe shuck and jive when you get your child home for that day and make some adjustments in your own food and feeding plan so that you can adjust for any kinds of treats that you weren't planning on your child to have during the day. You can make those adjustments later on in the day when they get home. Yeah. Yes. So Clancy says, yes, Heather, kids came home with too much yesterday before trick-or-treating. Yeah, that happens, doesn't it? And then Heather says, I'm mom of 7-year-old twins, and it always seems something is coming home. Yeah, it can be so frustrating, but how valuable, it is so valuable to know and to have that communication with your child, so your child is letting you know that, hey, I had cupcakes and this and that and the other, so that you can be like, okay, well, I was, in your mind, you don't have to say this to your child, but you can say, I was planning on dessert tonight after dinner, but since we've already had it at school, I'll just table that to another day later on in the week. It does get tough when there's a whole bunch of sweets at school and then you come home and do trick-or-treating. But I would just say trick-or-treating is one day a year. It is probably, for me personally, it was one of my favorite holidays as a child. I know a lot of children out there, it is their most favorite holiday as well. And I don't want to ruin that for kids. So I want to make sure that we're always balancing their joy and their fun with responsibility. And kids are not going to be the ones to necessarily self-regulate themselves around sweets. And that's the unfortunate thing. Kids are great at self-regulating, but candy is really hard to self-regulate around. And so they need help from their parents to help them regulate it. But you can do it in ways that's not oppressive, that's not restrictive, that's responsible and honors their joy and enjoyment, but also keeps all these sweets in their place. So the question for me is, what am I going to do with all these sweets in my bucket? Not going to be easy. I'm going to probably do what I've always done, keep them out and about, try to manage myself. I don't worry about my kids so much, but I do worry about myself. But probably move those to the freezer and out after a couple weeks. Anyways, great to see all of you guys. I hope this was helpful for you. You can find a lot of information about Halloween, about restriction, about my own personal backstory on sweets and treats over on my blog, jillcastle.com/blog. And I do also on the Nourished Child podcast talk about sweets and restriction, so you can find more information there. If you're not listening to that podcast, I invite you to get on over there and start listening. It's a lot of fun. I have a lot of great guests on the show and more to come at the throughout the end of this year. So thank you all for attending. Love to see you all. Happy Halloween, and I hope that hangover is gone. Ciao.